I grew up in Elsternwick in Victoria, and my brother ended up going to Vietnam for that war, and I don't know whether that triggered it or not, but I decided to join the Navy. I finished an apprenticeship as an electrician, and then applied to join the Navy after I'd completed that. And then I went and did trade training at Narimba in New South Wales in Quakers Hill. That was the apprentice training school. That's where they used to do all the technical training. It used to be Schofields Airfield out in Blacktown in New South Wales. I was there for about 3 months. And again, that was just going over all the trade theory that the Navy wanted to learn, because it's being on a ship, it's different to normal electrical systems. So you had to sort of get converted to the way the Navy operated and the way ships operated. In those days, it was four people into a room, so it was 4 single beds in one room. It was fairly luxurious for the time, I suppose. Lino floors, so you had to polish the floors every night. And the big thing is a lot of people living in close concentration together. Is the main thing they try to teach at recruit school is living in communal harmony. So watching TV, it might be 100 people trying to watch TV and deciding to watch one channel and things like that. The first 6 weeks you don't have leave, then after that, depending on your roster, you'll get the weekend off. So every 3rd weekend you had to stay back and work. Most people went into Melbourne and partied at the Travelodge or YMCA, somewhere cheap, so you could have more money to spend doing other things. The ships used to have a lot of electricians specialising in various fields. I was looking after lighting and motors. And then they had other electrical systems that were after computers and nav aids, and others that looked after the radar and things like that. Once you finish the course, you go to sea. My first ship was HMAS Supply. So that was the fleet oiler. So I went on that, and that was based out of Sydney. So we went wherever the fleet went, because we supplied them all fuel. So it was an old, used to be an RFA, English Fleet Auxiliary. So it was a bit different to the rest of the Navy ships. It was, I think tonnage-wise, it was bigger than the Melbourne, but it only had a crew of about 150 on it, as opposed to the other warships that had, like the DDGs, had crews of 350, and I'm not sure how many the Melbourne had, but it had a lot of people on it. Felt a bit ordinary the first couple of days at sea, and then got used to it. But Supply was a bit funny, because when the tanks were full it was good, but when the tanks were half empty, it didn't have any baffle plates in it, so it would develop a roll. So you could be in rough weather, then 3 or 4 days later it would still be rolling, because the fluid inside was still going from side to side. I was due for a posting either to a shore depot or another ship, and I decided I wanted to stay with small crews, so I volunteered for submarines, because they only have a crew of 64, 65 people, and patrol boats, because they have a small crew as well. And after I put my application in, I was going away to England on course for submarines very shortly. On Supply, it was a big ship, but it was a very small crew, so you knew everyone. I had friends on Melbourne and on a couple of DDGs. You'd go down to visit them, and there were 300 people there, so you'd walk through and you wouldn't know anyone. You might know a few people, but not many. Obviously, when you're at sea on a ship and we're doing exercise, you'd see submarines every now and then, and other ships, and you'd go, oh, that looks pretty interesting. I'd like to go and have a look at that. When I applied, because I think they were short at the time, from when I applied to when I was on course was probably only 2 months. which is pretty quick for the Navy. So we're on course for about 3 months. You're basically on loan to the English Navy for the 3 months you're there, do all the Part 1 and 2 training, do the wet escape, and then come back to Australia to do your Part 3 training on a submarine, which is a task book. And you basically have to know your own job, and you have to know all the systems on the submarine. So if you're anywhere on the submarine and an emergency happens, you have to know what to do in that particular position, because there might not be anyone else there. So you have to be able to be competent in all areas in the submarine for all emergencies.
So part 2 was more to do with the actual ship, was it?
Yes, it's how it's built, how the systems operate, and all of that. And part 3 is the actual doing bit. Gosport, it's probably the coldest one. It's colder than Victoria, and it's bleak when because we're there in January, which is winter, and the water coming off the English Channel was just freezing. It was just bitterly cold and wet. Well, we had study to do, but we also had the bar at the base. The English pubs were different then, as they still had sessions. So on a weekend, you'd go to the pub thinking you could do what you did in Australia and go to a beer garden, and they'd say, no, bar's shut now, it doesn't open again until 5 o'clock. So you'd be stuck in a town with nothing open, wondering what to do. So it took a fair bit to get used to. I did my Part 3 on Oxley, and then I was posted to Onslow. Sorry, no, not Onslow, Otway. It was really exciting, a little bit frightening, a bit of trepidation, but it was exciting. And I thought, well, how many people do I know they're going to do this or can do this? So it was really quite exciting. We were just going out, exercising with ships, because we also had to train the ships up for anti-submarine warfare, and we would train them up and be a target for them, and unbeknownst to them, they'd be a target for us. We used to sail usually a week before the fleet went out. Yeah. If we went to Jervis Bay to exercise, we'd normally sail the week before, so it'd be there for when the ships got there. It's the best way to describe living on a submarine is being in an aircraft that's full of people, and there's nowhere you can go except to the toilet where you're by yourself. That's basically the only place you can be where you can shut a door. Again, it didn't... Some people got a bit... No, I don't think anyone got claustrophobic. People used to suffer from living in close quarters with people. It was just little habits that would annoy you. Someone tapping their teaspoon on the edge of a cup, making a clinking noise when you're just about dozing off to sleep would be extremely annoying. It's the little things like that. There was never, I don't think I ever saw any really major blow-ups, but it was just being able to control yourself, and a lot of people could switch off to a lot of things. See, the other thing, everyone had a tremendous sleep debt, because we, depending on what exercise you were doing, you used to work 6 hours, have 6 hours off, but in that 6 off, that was your eating and sleeping time. So you'd never get more than 5 hours sleep in a stretch. So if you're at sea for a couple of weeks, you end up with a good sleep debt and continually tired. You had the watch going on, and the watch coming off. So if you were watch going on, half an hour before you had to go on, you'd be served your meal. So someone would go from your mess to the galley to pick up the meals, come back, eat them, and then you'd go to work, go on watch, relieve your counterpart, and they'd come down and have their meal. So you find most sailors eat very fast. They don't talk much because they're about to go on watch. It was one of the social highlights of the day was mealtime, because you're all sitting down together, but then it was usually fairly quiet because you had to eat to go on watch. Depending if you're doing a serious exercise, you'd be in that, but if you weren't in a really big exercise, you could be in you might be on a 4-hour watch and have 8 hours off. Or if you're in transit, you could be in 4 hours on, or an hour on, and 10 hours off. It really depended on what mode of operations you were performing. The coxswain was trained as basically a senior first aider, and he had all the good books and all the good drugs, and they always had a radio, so if they needed more help, they could get it. We had one guy medevaced off because he had an abscess in his tooth, and every time the diesels ran, the air pressure changes, so he was in a lot of pain. I think we had an appendicitis attack. I think he got medevaced off. I think that was about all. Nothing, not too many major accidents. I was on Orion at the time when Collins was coming online, and they were taking a lot of the guys to do the training for Collins class and that. And after I'd left Orion, I went to do the training for Collins and was going to be working at Stirling in the workshops doing the maintenance on it. The Oberons were basically a 60s boat designed by the British, and Collins was a hybrid off the Scandinavians, and that was everything was designed in the 80s. So there was a mark, big CT screens. Well, that was modern at the time, and look at a big CT screen now, and everyone's got flat screens. So in 20 years, the technology changes rapidly. Yeah. When I left the Navy, I ended up working for ASC, which built the submarines, and I worked with them for 18 years doing maintenance on the Collins-class submarines. Platypus was the submarine base at in Neutral Bay, across the road from the customs office, and we had the 5 submarines or 6 submarines. Or there was always one in Cockatoo Island, so we had 5 submarines running out of there at various stages. So you basically nearly always had a submarine in. It was very rare that you had an empty wharf, because the submarines all had designated maintenance periods. You had dailies, weeklies, monthlies maintenance, but then they had set maintenance periods, a bit like an aeroplane. They have to have mandatory maintenance that has to be done in a set time frame to keep it in standard. Well, it's a pretty dynamic and stressful environment for machinery, being underwater and under pressure. I think what the American Admiral said, you've got a big battery, a couple of miles of electrical cable, and you put it all in water. It's technically quite dangerous, and you'd have a leak every now and then. Yeah. We had 1 or 2 major hoses blow out. We had a few tonne of water come in very quickly, but nothing. Well, they were major, but not too many of them. Well, I was at Penguin most of the time until I got married. And then after I got married, I was in the Naval married quarters wherever they sent me. I was on Orion, and we home ported. That was when the Navy moved the submarine base from Platypus to Stirling in Western Australia. So we home ported Orion at Stirling and posted over there. Okay. So we then ran out of Stirling. Platypus was a 5-minute walk to Kirribilli Station in the middle of North Sydney, and from the front gate at Stirling to the workshops was 5 kilometres, and you had to have a car to do it because you weren't allowed to walk on the causeway. So Stirling is Garden Island, which is an island. Half of it is National Park, and the other half is the Navy base. So it's quite remote and isolated. Again, that was only work. We all lived in Rockingham or in Moranborough in the married quarters there. Yeah. But again, coming from Sydney, Western Australia at the time still had rosters for the petrol stations, so everyone was shut at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, coming from Sydney, 24-hour service for anything. Took quite a while to get used to. When we home ported Orion, We come around the bottom of the coast into Bass Strait, and we had a following sea of about 25 to 30 feet, and every second wave was breaking over the top of the fin of the submarine. We're on the surface. We had to slow down to 5 knots for about 3 days, and we were rolling over about 45 degrees. So everyone was sick. Yeah. It was horrendous.
And in that rough weather, you can't submerge the submarine?
Well, you can, but it's extremely dangerous. Then you can only stay dived for so long before you have to come to periscope depth to recharge the batteries and get fresh air and that. So we waited. They eventually did it, but it was still quite rough. Well, I was on Supply in rough weather, and the waves were breaking over the top of Supply, and that was a huge ship. And even in the submarine, when it's like that, when you're 200 or 300 feet down, you can still feel you still get the motion of the rolling. You might have to go fairly deep for it to calm right down. If you're going to Hawaii, you knew it was going to be pretty good, because the going to Hawaii is always a bit of fun, and you get this nice weather, and it's working with the Americans is always good. But just working off Sydney or off the West Australian coast, just training up ships gets pretty boring and monotonous. And if you're working with aircraft, we'd have to sail out the week before, waiting for the aircraft to come out to do their training, and we'd get a signal, the captain would get a signal saying, oh, the aircraft has to go back now, the pilot's fatigued, and we're stuck there for another couple of days. It gets pretty demoralising. In all the war games that have the Americans and us and the Brits and whoever we're playing with as designated partners or allies against the others, and try to get them and see who was the best at it, and it was always exciting. They had cameras set up over all the weapons computers so they could work out the course speed to see if our firing solution was correct, and when we assumed it was correct, we'd fire a green grenade, which is launched from the submarine, which breaks the surface and goes into the air like a flare, and a green grenade simulates a torpedo firing. So the ships would know that they've been fired upon. We normally had a judge on board but they could also they also had all the documents to review to see the firing solutions and the course speed of the ships that you were targeting. You would have got them and to see if the other ship had any idea we were there or not. When you look out at the ocean and you see a ship on the surface and you go, is there a submarine there? You don't know. It's a lot harder to pick. And with the war games, they made it hard for the submarines. They gave them certain areas they had to be within and choke points that you had to go through to give the ships more of a go. But see, most of the ships travels at speeds where their sonar's not really effective. The last posting I had was, we always maintained a posting at recruit school, and I got that posting. So I went there as an instructor, and of course with all the new recruits, they'd see your dolphins, they had all different branches there, so they could teach the people or show people or talk to them about the branch you were in. So they might get more people who think about submarines or think about the other instructors, and so they could talk about their life in the service. So that was my last posting, and I left the Navy from there. I would have happily stayed there, but they were going to bring me back to Stirling to do maintenance again, and by that stage I was over that, and I did some contract work up north, and then I did some reserve time, and then I was asked to do another 2 years continuous full-time service with the Navy. So I did that. And then I left the Navy again, and I was working with ASC, which was the firm that built the Collins class, and I stopped doing reserve time then because it would have been a conflict of interest working with AC during reserve time. I thought it would be. I still had contact with a lot of the people I was on Oberons with, and I knew most of the guys that changed over, so it was a really good transition for me, without a doubt. Out of 10 trainees, you probably might get only 5 that pass at their part 3. But the submarine arm used to be 500 then, that was in the mid-80s, and the submarine arm now is still about 500. The numbers haven't changed a great deal. It's just the nature of the beast, that the conditions and work just burn everyone out. And it's just real commitment. When I joined submarines, you meant to have been at sea for 2 years before you went to a submarine, so you knew what life was like at sea, so they didn't have to teach you that. And then to help the shortfall, they decided to recruit people straight in the Navy as submariners. And they had to come to sea, learn what it was like to be at sea and being a submariner at the same time, which was a lot harder. And I think they didn't do as well as they thought, because the guys thought, oh, I'd be better in general service, but it's like anything, you give up something and you get something back. There was a bit of pride in it, and of course we got paid extra money, and we got to stay in hotel accommodation when we were in foreign ports, because the conditions were so bad on the submarine. So, you know, it was always nice to be in a nice 5-star hotel in Hong Kong or Singapore, as opposed to having to go back and live on the ship.